We're now joined by Shehan Jeyarajah, CBS Sports, and obviously a huge game tonight, Shehan, and then, of course, tomorrow, Texas and Ohio State. Your thoughts about, let's start with tonight, your thoughts about, is it mirror images in a way of Notre Dame and Penn State? They kind of just seem like the same teams.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities. There's no question about it. They want to be led by their defense. They have veteran quarterbacks who have some real strengths and also have some limitations. But, I think that what really is the biggest contrast to me is kind of the style of these head coaches. When you talk about Marcus Freeman, he's somebody who is a former player, of course, played at Ohio State a while back. And I think that it's taken him some time to loosen up. But you start to see some of this come together. He's got some great influences, whether it is, of course, from the coaching ranks, whether it is from the analytics ranks. I think he's a really progressive type of head coach just in the way that he approaches game management and situations like that. And with James Franklin, you're talking about a coach who at times has been too conservative, who, maybe isn't as aggressive as a coach like Marcus Freeman. Now, I do think that the addition of offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki from Kansas has been huge for this program. You've seen this offense continue to get better, but these are two programs that I think want to be led by their defense. And the question for me is going to be which offense is able to make their imprint on this game as well.
Riley Leonard versus Drew Aller. Who would you rather have in a pinch?
Yeah, they're such different players. It's crazy kind of how different they are. Just to get into their profile a little bit, Riley Leonard is much more of a running quarterback. He's been very inconsistent throwing the ball this year, but he is a battering ram at quarterback, and he gives you enough as a passer to where you at least have to respect it. With Drew Aller, you're talking about a prototypical NFL quarterback. He's got the size, he's got the arm. You've seen moments in this college football playoff. I think of that downfield touchdown throw against Boise State where he layers it right over the top of the safety and into the arms of an outstretched receiver. So, again, he is a big-time passer of the football. Doesn't give you as much necessarily as a dual-threat player. If I had to pick, heading into a matchup like this, I probably would prefer to have a Riley Leonard because I think that his floor is just a different level than Drew Aller. I think that even if he struggles to throw the ball, you're going to get that running game. I think back to the Georgia game last week, he only threw for 90 yards on 24 attempts, which is just an astonishingly low number, but he ran for 80. And he also picked up several key first downs over the course of that game, including in the fourth quarter. So I think that I probably would take the gamer in this situation just because of the strength of these two teams, but it really is a pick your poison in some ways.
Shehan, where is your excitement level for this one, this first semifinal game, and just knowing the kind of road that we've walked to get to this point of this expanded playoff? The other matchup we're going to get to, obviously, but just your general thoughts as we get ahead of tonight's game and your excitement for Nittany Lions and Irish and somebody getting to play for a national title, maybe win one for the first time in forever.
Well, yeah, I think that you mentioned it, right? There's so many positive storylines going into this game. I think it's going to be a very close game. I think it's going to be one of the more competitive games that we've had in the college football playoffs so far. And there are so many moving pieces that I think that the coaches and the coaching staffs will have the ability to impact, whether it is, does Andy Kotelnicki take a shot to try to force Notre Dame to really sit back and worry about the passing game? What do we get from this Notre Dame defensive line, and how does Penn State's offensive line match up with it? I think that there are just so many matchups that are kind of indeterminate, I guess you could say, at this point. And that makes it a lot of fun. So for me, I've got really high excitement for this game. I think this is going to be one of the better games of the playoff. It might not be very high scoring. If you're a bettor, I'd probably take the under on this game just because of the way that these two teams play defense. But, on a scale out of 10, I'm probably giving it a solid 8.
Shehan, we know Steve Sarkisian's history, Washington, USC, then had to kind of make a comeback in life and won a huge battle that is unbelievable, and then goes to coach with Nick Saban, comes into Texas. He's turned him around very quickly if you really think about it. Ryan Day, incredibly successful, but has not been able to beat Michigan. James Franklin's been very successful, but has not really been able to get them in a certain position. And then, you have one more. that is a part of this and what Marcus Freeman has done. Who, in your opinion, is the best story among these four?
Oof, so many good ones, honestly. I think, to take a step back and talk about all of them for a second, I don't want to act like this is a bunch of scrappy underdogs making this Final Four, right? Like, this is 3 blue bloods in a group of 4. But when you look at this group, only one of them has won a national championship in the college football playoff era. Only 2 of them have won a national championship in the BCS or CFP era. Because with Penn State and Notre Dame, you're talking about since the 80s. The last time that these 2 teams won a national championship. You're pushing 40 years at this point. So I think that it's really cool that that this new format has opened the door and opened the possibility to, again, not Akron coming in winning a national championship, but teams that haven't necessarily been in this conversation before. I do think that offhand, I mean, what Ryan Day had to go through this season, especially after that loss to Michigan, and the way that this team has come back angry and the way that they've come back focused. It's one of the most spurring things that I've ever seen in my years covering college football. I've never seen a team face adversity and come back as strong as this team has. Now, look, talent-wise, they've always had it within them. I've said all year, I think that this is the best roster in college football, and I think it's actually harder to name the second because they're so much further ahead than everybody else. But this is a team, again, that was a little listless, that was a little lifeless at times this season, and something happened within those 10 days between the end of the regular season and the college football playoff. They found themselves in so many ways. And, all 4 of these coaches, like you mentioned, they're kind of defined in many ways by not being able to win the big one as yet. But I think that nowhere is that more true than at Ohio State, where you've had a team that's rated among the best in college football year after year. You've had a team that was a field goal away against Georgia back in 2022 from potentially playing for a national championship and maybe winning a national championship. You obviously talk about how close some of these Michigan games have been. You talk about, in 2019, they go and lose a close game to Clemson. The next year they come back and they just run into that Alabama team in 2020 that might be the best of the Nick Saban era. They've been so close for so many years. I think it would be really gratifying to see them break through.
Okay, I need, because I think I know what's going on, but I would like you to explain what's going on with Carson Beck. And if he was, Georgia's situation isn't settled for next year. So it would seem to make sense if you wanted to play college, you would just go back to Georgia. But I feel like there's something we don't know here.
Well, I think that both sides are probably a little ready to move on. And, I think that it's a little unfortunate for both sides, frankly, but especially for Carson Beck. It's kind of gotten lost because of how much football he's played over the last 2 years. But he just sat and waited for 3 years. Nobody really does that anymore as a highly ranked quarterback coming out of high school. And by the way, 2 of those years that he had to sit and wait were behind a former walk-on in Stetson Bennett. He came in, he obviously played really well in his first year. And I think that he feels like he's been blamed for some of the offensive issues that they had this year. And I don't think he's wrong. You look right now at what Brock Bowers is doing at the next level and what Ladd McConkey is doing at the next level and what Todd Monken is doing at the next level. Like, there's a whole lot of stuff that's changed about this offense that has absolutely nothing to do with the quarterback position. And so, I think for him, his thought, I imagine, when he came back was always, well, to have a successful NFL career, it's really helpful to have 2 years as a starter, to hit X amount of starts, to be in a good situation. And I think he probably looks around right now at Georgia and just wonders if this is still a good situation for a quarterback to walk into. You watch, of course, in the college football playoff, Gunnar Stockton comes into the lineup, and I think he plays a pretty solid game overall. But, they couldn't block. Their receivers dropped tons of passes. They couldn't run the ball at any consistent level. And if you're Carson Beck looking, that's what you're planning to walk back into if you come back to the University of Georgia. I think that he's going to try and find a situation where, one, of course, he can win. I think he absolutely does care about winning. And 2, where he has the opportunity to potentially show off more of his game than he was able to in what ultimately, because of, I think, some coaching decisions, was a pretty limited Georgia passing game and Georgia offense in 2024. So the obvious answer is, by the way, a school that last year also pulled somebody who had declared for the NFL draft, that of course being Miami and Cam Ward last year. I think there's a really good chance he ends up there right now. But obviously I think he's going to be very open-minded, and ultimately is going to make a decision that I think puts him in the best position to have a successful 2025.
Shehan, I think one of the reactions to that story was when people saw Texas Tech mentioned as one of the teams that could be interested or is interested or whatever, along with Miami, who just, that's obvious. They're going to be like that team probably every year. Notre Dame was mentioned, I think, in one of it as well. But I'm seeing some of the Tech fans like pushing back like, no, like we're good. But did that raise your eyebrows at all? Or do you have any thoughts on maybe Texas Tech perhaps being interested in trying to shake things up at Signal Caller?
Well, look, I mean, I think this reminds me a lot of back in 2020, 2021, when Joey McGuire was hired and they made a really significant push for Quinn Ewers when he was transferring from Ohio State.
Yep.
And I think that there was real push there from Texas Tech. I don't know how much serious consideration there was. And I think it's going to kind of be like this for Carson Beck too, right? Like you've got a quarterback in Baron Morton who's played a lot of football, had a lot of success there. They've got a freshman, by the way, in Will Hammond, who they think is absolutely the future of the program at Texas Tech. And the nice thing about Carson Beck is that he would only be a one-year stopover. I don't ultimately think that this is going to happen, but I do think that Texas Tech wants to be taken seriously. I think that they want to send out the message, hey, we are swinging as high as anybody. Of course, they have one of the top transfer classes in all of college football. They've done a tremendous job this offseason, but I don't necessarily think that there's a whole lot of fire to the smoke.
Do you think Miami would be the number one spot for him? Because they will be desperate enough to overpay.
Well, I think it's a couple of things, right? One, yes, of course, they do pay well. I think that Cam Ward could certainly tell you that. Two, they are extremely quarterback needy. You watched, of course, in their bowl game, they put in Emory Williams, who just is not ready at this point to be the kind of quarterback that Miami needs to be what they hope to be in 2025. It's worth throwing out, right, that Carson Beck's girlfriend does go to Miami. That probably is at least a little bit of a relevant factor. He's certainly spent some time there. But the other thing, I think more than any of these factors, is they took a quarterback last year who was going to be a mid-round draft pick in Cam Ward, put him in a great situation. He ended up being a Heisman finalist. And now, even though he was a fifth-year player, he's going to be a top 5 to 10 pick in the NFL draft. That's what Shannon Dawson's offense at Miami does. And, you know, they have some questions to answer at receiver. Like they need to stock up in that room as well because Xavier Restrepo is going to be gone. But I do think that also if you're a quarterback right now and you want to up your stock, I mean, nobody's done it better over the last year than Miami.
Shehan, when the Jay Hartzell story popped that he was going to SMU from Texas, which really was not many people knew this. In fact, it was shocking in a lot of different ways. I saw the reaction about the I'm keeping a close eye on is whether a brain drain of Texas public higher education talent is on the way because of how much meddling is coming from the state government. You just feel like that one of the reasons he got tired of dealing with politicians when he's at Texas, where you have to deal with politicians?
Yeah, I mean, look, here's the reality, right, is that I think that at the University of Texas, if you're the president or chancellor of that system, you are a politician and you are a public figure. At SMU, and, you know, I live right down the road from SMU. My sister went to SMU. It's just a different lifestyle. You know, obviously people in Waco at Baylor, right? Like they can also attest. People at TCU, you know, Chancellor Boschini stepping down for them. Like it's just a different life than having to go down to the State House every day, to have to worry that, you know, somebody's going to pass a new law that's going to really try to target something that you're attempting to do. It's just a different lifestyle than being the chancellor at the University of Texas. And I think even compared to Texas A&M, because UT is the school in Austin and because they are so visible when it comes to the Austin State House, like, again, you're dealing with a lot of outside factors. And we talk about this all the time in the context of the athletic department, right? Of course, you know, there's the football coach. Of course, there's the athletic director. There's the president. There's a chairman of the board. There's outside boosters. There's just all sorts of people who get involved whenever it's just coming to the athletic department. Well, you know, the university president is dealing with that on an even bigger scale, of course, when trying to, you know, allocate funding to the, you know, whatever department, right? Like right. It's just something that you have to fight with almost every day. And when you go to SMU, I mean, again, like obviously there's hard work to do there as well, but it's a different kind of hard work and it's a different kind of grind. And so I am curious long term. And look, this is not something that's new necessarily. There's a reason that public school presidents don't necessarily last a whole lot longer than 5 to 10 years. Whereas, with Gerald Turner, I mean, at SMU, I think he was there for 20 plus years. Like it's just a different kind of life. And I'm curious if we're going to see some movement on that. Now, look, Texas isn't going to stop investing in college athletics anytime soon. I think they're going to be just fine from a football perspective, but it's just an interesting dynamic to watch and one that, again, I think is going to continue to get bigger.
From a semifinal perspective, I guess we'll end it with this, Shehan. The other game, Texas and Ohio State, are you as confident in the Buckeyes as everybody else across the world seems to be? I mean, I'm like preparing myself for a blowout the way people are talking, and I don't feel like that's the case at all, but maybe you do. How do you see this one?
Well, I want to start with this. Texas's defense might be the best in the country, and that includes Ohio State, who I think is the other team that's in contention for best defense in the country. And when you talk about Texas defense, especially their secondary, they will provide just a completely different challenge to Ohio State's passing game than they've seen. They've got the Thorpe Award winner in Jahdae Barron. They've got an All-American defensive back in Michael Taft. They've got a fantastic transfer in Andrew Makuba. Malik Muhammad is a really kind of underrated developing cornerback as well. And so I don't think that Ohio State's going to be able, for example, to do what they did to Oregon against this Texas defense. Here's my huge issue and my huge worry for whether Texas is going to be able to compete in this game. They averaged 1 yard per carry against Arizona State. In the 2 Georgia games, they averaged 1 yard per carry in each of those games. And Ohio State just held the undefeated #1 Oregon Ducks to negative 23 rushing yards. So the issue becomes, is Texas going to be able to run the ball at all? Like if their running game gets erased, and not obviously that's not sack adjusted. When you talk about the Oregon game, I mean, Oregon was at 1.8 sack adjusted yards per carry, just an obscene number. If they can't run the ball, I just don't think that their offense works at all. Like I think that people have complained and pointed to issues at the quarterback position, but it really doesn't have a whole lot to do with the quarterback position. Teams know that they can take away that run game without having to dedicate a whole lot of extra help, and it puts everything on the passing game's shoulders. And while this is a really good group of receivers, it's not Xavier Worthy and it's not A.D. Mitchell necessarily in that receiver room either. So I don't think it's going to be a blowout, certainly. I think that there are things that Texas can do to try to scheme around it on both sides of the ball to at least keep this game close. But I just don't think that they have the depth necessarily to be able to keep up with Ohio State. And especially if they can't run the ball, that's when I think you run into real trouble.
Yeah, because they grilled Clemson with the run game. Just destroyed them with it. Thanks for your time, Shehan. Appreciate it. Enjoy the games. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you again next week. We'll know who's in the championship game. Shehan Jeyarajah with us from CBS Sports.